Alrighty guys, Coach Gregory from Base Wrestling again. So I do apologise for how late these are. We're well past semester one, actually at the end of the first year. So what we're going to go through today is our lifespan growth and development. So this is part of Edith Cowan University's Bachelor of Sport and Exercise Science. Semester 1, unit code if you're interested, SPS 1530. It is quite a useful little unit, and so we'll roll onto it and hopefully get through it reasonably quickly. Fair warning, there's a lot in it and it does take a bit to get through, so feel free to take breaks as needed. Cool. So, session 1. So basically, before we get into this, the reason we're doing this is basically this forms part of my review process for my exam prep. And we did actually record these before, but hey, internet, I don't know. And it also serves for preview. If you are thinking of studying this unit, then this is a nice little overview of what's actually in this thing. And for those who are on the based program or part of Wrestling Association of Zambia, this can be part of your professional development that you would do in the event that you're unable to attend university for whatever reason and you want to build on top of your coaching knowledge. So that's why we're doing this stuff. So alright, so session 1 basically, so what we're looking at here is cognitive, socioeconomic and behavioural influences on lifespan growth and development. Sounds really complicated, it's really not. We're looking at something called Gallagher's theory and Gallagher's hourglass. This will get hit on heavily in this unit, insane. Alright, we'll look at nature versus nurture, that old argument, and where it's come from, how it's impacted our world in terms of coaching and development and training. We'll go into what is epigenetics, how does it influence development, and then we'll also look at how do we go about measuring development, what are our markers that we're looking for, how do we know if a child is above or in front or behind a curve. So lifespan, so when we're talking about lifespan, this involves the growth, maintenance and regulation, okay, constructed through biological, socio-cultural and individual factors all working together. So from birth all the way through until they put you in the cold ground, finally. Development is the pattern of change that begins at conception and continues through the lifespan. Okay, so it involves growth as well as the decline brought on by aging. Okay, so we get to a certain point, things start going and tapering off. To varying levels depending on lifestyle and location and past injury history and all that sort of thing. Alright, so lifespan perspective. Okay, so what we're looking at here is it is multi-directional and it is multi-dimensional. So it's not simply one thing. So when we're looking at multi-dimensional, we're talking about the biological aspect, the cognitive aspect, and the socio-emotional aspect. Okay, so not just how we physically age, how we evolve mentally, and also how we evolve in terms of our emotional attachments, development, and skills. Multi-directional, so it's not simply one component expanding. There's multiple movements that are happening because we've got these 3 dimensions that we're going to move in. We've also, a movement in one is going to impact a movement or a change in another, because our cognitive is directly related to our biological, because our cognitive stems from our brain. Our socio-emotional is largely driven by our hormones, which again are a biological component. So there's no such thing as stasis, which is the big takeaway here, and we can't really silo things. That doesn't work either. So multi-dimensional, so what we were talking about here was the difference between cognitive, or the interactions between cognitive, socio-emotional and biological. The main thing to understand here is it changes as we grow, and as you can see there, the biological thing, we're talking about height, weight, physical appearance, etc. Then we're talking about cognitive, so we're talking about changes in intelligence, memory, etc. And socio-emotional is the way our relationships change and our personalities evolve over time. So periods of development, you do need to know these are important. So prenatal, so this is from conception to birth. Okay, so this is basically happening inside the female body. Infancy is birth to 24 months. Early childhood, 24 months through to about 6 years. Okay, middle to late childhood, 6 to 10 years. Adolescence, depending on gender and a lot of other stuff, somewhere around about that sort of 10-ish, can be up to 12, through till about 21, depending on the individual concerned. Early adulthood, 20s to 30s, middle adulthood, 40s through to 50s, and late adulthood, 60 until death. Basically, elderly is what we would be classed as. That is changing as well, depending on where you are, who you are, and that sort of thing. So Gallagher's hourglass of development, this is a big thing. You do need to be aware of this. You need to know this, and you need to know all these different phases, the factors that influence it, how it, and the premise behind it, what drives it. Okay, so basically Gallagher's hourglass proposes that people develop in phases, and this can be influenced. Okay, development is the result of hereditary and emotional factors. So there you've got the two jugs, the hereditary and the emotional, pouring into the hourglass. Okay, these factors combine to a point, and at that point the hourglass turns over and the sand starts running the other way. Basically, this is that tipping point where we go from the growth phase to the declining phase. Okay, certain things act as filters to help slow the loss, in a sense, of sand. Okay, so there's things we can do to slow aging. Physical activity being one of the big ones. Okay, diet being another big factor that we can use to influence how we age. Okay, lifestyle choices, they can also heavily influence that as well. All right, so our phases in our hourglass, this you must know. Okay, got to know it, got to be across it. So we have the, so we'll start down the bottom. Okay, so we're starting with our information decoding and information encoding stage, what we call the reflexive stage. This is from the very beginning. So we're talking in utero to 4 months, and from 4 months to the first year. So reflexive movement phase. These things are automatic. The child, the newborn simply does these. Okay, so you touch the side of their mouth and they automatically go looking, basically seeking the nipple to suckle to feed. Okay, it's just automatic. Eventually you touch the hand and they'll grab whatever's there. Could be a finger, could be a hand, could be a stick, or anything. If it comes in contact with the hand, then the hand will try to close on it. Okay, so simple things like that. Rudimentary phase, so the reflex inhibition stage, and the pre-control stage. So this is sort of from birth to 1, depending on the child, through till about 2 years. Okay, so they're starting to develop some control over some of these responses. Okay, so they're able to actually hold their head upright. They're able to actually start moving their head. They begin to learn how to reach out for things and grip things, but grip with purpose. I'm grabbing something to bring it to me, to do something with it. So this is where they start interacting with toys and their surroundings a little bit more. Then we move into so once we start moving out of that rudimentary movement phase, we now start to move into our fundamental movement phase. This is extremely important from an athletic viewpoint, from a sports and training viewpoint. Okay, it starts at 2, goes through to about 7 to 10, depending on the child. Here we have our initial stage, our elementary stage, and our mature stage. Okay, and they're normally broken up into about 2-year blocks. So what we're looking for here, the other wording you'll get for this is, if you look on the left hand side, we've got our fundamental stage there, which is where we're at now. So we've got our initial stage, emerging elementary stage, and our proficient stage. So different words for it, understand what those differences are. Okay. So during the initial stage, this is when the child is beginning to learn these movements. They do not have a great degree of proficiency. So like the first time you see a child trying to run, okay, they get a few steps and they sort of trip over themselves and go crashing into the dirt, usually. Okay, usually accompanied by tears and all sorts of other things. Learning to balance, learning to do basic movements like throwing a ball, and you get the thing. Okay, so that's in our initial stage. Then we get our emerging elementary stages where they're starting to get a bit more proficient. They can run. They're not an Olympic sprinter, but they can run for 50 meters and not fall over themselves. Okay, we got sort of arms and legs going all over the place. We don't have great coordinated movement, but we're starting to get a vague concept of what to do. We can keep our balance. We close our eyes, we may not keep it for very long, but we can keep our balance, usually, if we concentrate. Okay, and their arms are moving about a bit and trying to retain balance, but they're able to keep their balance. Okay, and then when we move to the proficient stage, this is the bit where we're starting to see coordinated movement of arms and legs, something that we would identify as running technique. Okay, and then where we're starting to see, we ask them to throw a ball and we're getting the extension or the rotation in the shoulder, the movement through, the flick of the hand. We ask them to balance, and they're able to balance with relative ease, and they can even balance with their eyes closed for a period of time. So they've got a degree of mastery over the skills that they need. Once we're through that, and then we go into our specialized movement phase, now we're starting to look at the progression, so a transition, application, and lifelong utilization. This is where, at the moment in wrestling, a lot of the time in places like Australia and others, this is where we're picking these kids up. And realistically, we're probably well behind. Okay? So here, they're moving from, yep, they've got running technique. Now we can start to develop that with a view to improving that performance, improving that technique. And they've got the capability and the capacity to actually do that. They've got the control of their body to be able to implement those instructions. As we go through the application stage, they become more proficient at this. And we start to see closer mimicking, I suppose, of what you would expect a proficient adult to be able to do. And then finally, in the lifelong utilization stage, they have achieved actual mastery of these skills. And this is where we start to see the big gaps appear between those who are okay and those who are going to be our elites. Okay, and a lot of that origin, that elite capacity is actually, we can track that back to that fundamental movement phase. In the early parts of that was where it became, the indicators were there, and that's where they need to make those connections, in that 2 to 6 age range. So, and we'll get onto that in a second, but this is important, you need to know that. So you get lifelong daily utilization, you get lifelong recreational utilization, and lifelong competitive utilization. It's across the board. All these, we refer to them as fundamental movement skills because that's what they are. Okay. So development, the nature versus nurture argument, you'll hear people argue about this all the time. Okay. Fact of the matter is, it's all got an influence on you, and it depends on when this changes over time. Okay, so nature argument, basically genes are inherited, genes contain information, growth is logical and sequential, and we learn to do some things intuitively. Some will argue that what these things are, but that's basically the nature argument. That nature is more important. Oh, that kid's just born bad. Okay. Yeah, anyway, right, not going to say any more on that. And nurture. So people change depending on their environmental exposure. Okay, we learn skills and ideas as the need dictates. Our environment has a strong influence on how we evolve. Nutrition, medical care, family, peers, and society all influence development, and coaches and other people have a strong influence on development as well. Okay, so that's the nurture argument. All right. So epigenetics, basically the study of how your behaviors and environment can cause changes that affect the way your genes work. Okay. So the question becomes, if your genes are altered, is this then transferred to our offspring? And if it is, then to what degree? So we know that that organisms evolve over time. Okay, humans have evolved over time. We can see this even in modern day humans, the difference between people from Africa, people from Asia, people from India, people from Norway, and someone from Australia. Okay, you can usually, to a degree, pick out what somebody's heritage is simply by their appearance. So humans have changed over time and they've adapted to their environments. So now with the modern world, the question is starting to become, well, how much of an influence does our upbringing and our environment and our access to medical care and all these different things, how much does that affect us as individuals, and how much is from the individual is now transferred to our child? And this is the basis behind that. And how much, so diabetes, for example, with diabetic parents, the child has a greater risk of developing diabetes. But how much is really influenced by the parents' genetics, and how much is actually influenced by the lifestyle choices and the food choices and the activity and lifestyle of the family as a unit on the child? Is it really genetics, or is it nurture? Is it a combination of both? Does the parent, if the parents have this condition, they then have a child, is the child now at greater risk of that because of a genetic predisposition, or is it simply the environment that the child is in? So that's basically what it comes down to. Genetics, you will get across this in anatomy and phys, but this is the basics of it. So 46 pairs of chromosomes, 23 from each parent. Okay, you get an egg from mum, sperm from dad, and they're formed by meiosis. And so that's basically cell division, but not replication. And then once they are combined, then this creates the zygote. So that's in fertilization. It's the first stage of human life. And basically it's the fusing of sperm and the egg, the 23 chromosomes each, to form 46 pairs, which is our fully functioning human eventually. Then mitosis is the process of cell division by replication, and this is what then this is how we grow as humans. Okay, so that's how our zygote actually becomes a full-blown, like what we identify as a fetus or a person, and then we go from there. So basics of genetics. So we got dominant and recessive genes. The basic principle is that one gene of each pair always exerts a stronger and overriding influence on the other. Okay, so we've got the normal gene, the mutated gene, so the father's carrying the mutated gene in this case. That is then transferred, or may be transferred, to the children. And obviously this is a hideously oversimplified example because we're only talking about 4 in this case. Okay, 4 from each parent, which gives us a flow-on effect. And that is not 100% complete, because obviously you can rearrange that in a number of different ways. But for the simplicity's sake, you can have dominant and recessive genes. The more recessive the gene, the rarer it is to show up in a given family unit. So sex inherited characteristics. So some genes contain information for various sexual traits, and some conditions can only be carried down through a specific genetic line on a particular chromosome. That's it. It can only be passed to females. Cannot go, does not go to a male. Period. End of story. That's it. And vice versa. You can get exactly the same thing. And this is, so you'll see situations where, in some cases, within a family, it's more common to see females with this particular trait. And that may not even be that common. It may be extremely rare. But then you could get in one generation, you've got 3 kids and 2 of them end up with red hair and one of them doesn't. Even though the red hair is extremely recessive and hasn't been seen for 3 generations. Recessive gene comes out of nowhere. All right, so milestones in development. So we're talking about things like what we're going to look at every single stage. We're going to look at the cognitive development, the mental development, the behavioral development, so that's the emotional and social development, motor development, so physical skill changes, and our ecological, so our environmental awareness and our interactional developments. Okay, so when we talk about environmental and ecological awareness, we're not talking about environmental extremism or anything like that, or woke, save the planet and hug the whales. Okay, that's with the person's environment. Okay, so our anthropometric measures, when we talk about these, we're talking about height, weight, limb lengths, bone density, body fat, body circumference, and bone lengths and fusion. Okay, that's one of the big giveaways of when we're hitting these points. Bone changes are pretty much very strong indicators of when a person has reached a certain point in their life. All right, so what we just covered then. So we've got the what is the cognitive socioeconomic, that's not right, socio-emotional, behavioral influences on lifespan growth and development. What is Gallagher's theory and Gallagher's hourglass? Okay, so if you remember that was the hourglass looking thing, how hereditary and environmental factors influence our development. What's the role of nature and nurture in development? So basically there are 2 main spheres that interact at different levels in different ways throughout our lifespan. What is epigenetics and how does it influence development? So this is the study of how our environment changes our genes and how that impacts our children and our evolution as a species. And how do we go about measuring development? So there's a number of different ways. We have cognitive, we have behavioral, we have physical, and then we have our environmental. So what is Gallagher's hourglass? Just spoke about that. So that's the model that we currently use for our progression of a child or a person through the lifespan. Why is monitoring milestones and measuring development important? If a person is having a problem and we can identify this early, then we can put corrective measures in place, minimize the effect it has on their life. It can, early intervention, if we see that a child is having problems with basic skills at 2 years old, then we're able to give that child the additional support they need so they're not as far behind everybody else when they finally get to school. So they're going to be a lot more likely to stay engaged and involved. Hopefully they stay healthier, have better life, have more fun, get more out of life, the universe, sport, and everything else. Okay, what are 4 things that influence development? So this could be anything. Parents, food, location, socio-economic, socio-emotional. They come from an abusive home. Genetics obviously has an impact. What else can we have? Hundreds of things. Okay. What are 4 common anthropometric measures? Height, weight, body mass index, circumferences, bone densities, and fusion. List keeps going. Okay. All right. That's pretty much that. And we're on to the next bit. Alrighty, so session 2. So what you're going to find here, this will be week 2 for you. So prenatal to birth. So basically what we're going to look at, what happens during conception, how does a fetus develop, what factors affect prenatal development, what happens during the birth, and what are the common problems in the prenatal stage. So we've got 3 phases in the prenatal stage. We have the germinal stage, embryonic, and the fetal. Okay, be aware of those. Know those. Okay. Early development is mostly controlled by genes. Okay. There's not much you can do. It's a self-contained environment. There's about the only environmental influence that is being had on the mother and transferred to the child. This can either be normal or abnormal, inherited conditions. It is what it is. It's very, very difficult to do much at this point. Extrinsic factors can still have positive and negative effects. You would have heard, or you may have heard the one about playing music to the fetus when they're in utero, and they are more inclined, to become musically inclined when they're older or when they're born as a child. It's been proven that keeping mums' stress levels and physical health positive has a positive effect on the fetus and on development. So this is why they say, for pregnant women, avoid alcohol, don't smoke, stay, eat healthy, stay fit, all that sort of stuff, because that has been shown. So it begins with conception. So male sperm combines with female ovum in the fallopian tube to create zygote. So this is the first full-fledged cell of a new person, the full 46 chromosomes. And then away we go from there. So you've got 2 weeks for the germinal stage. Another week 3 to week 8 is our embryonic stage. So this is when we start to see the formation of the brain. And then finally we get into our fetal stage, which is 9 weeks plus until birth. Cool. So germinal stage, like we said, lasts for 2 weeks. By the time the zygote implants in the uterus, it's already several hundred cells in size. Okay. The main cell types you're going to run across here are blastocytes. So they're the inner layer of cells that will become the embryo eventually. And trophocytes, so they're the outer layer that provides nutrition and support for the embryo. Okay, so true pregnancy starts when the zygote implants into the uterus. Okay, so until it's established, you can still potentially have a problem. Okay, embryonic stage is from implantation through to 8 weeks. Okay, it's now called an embryo. Okay. The 3 layers form. So we got an endoderm, a mesoderm, and an ectoderm. Okay, endo, inner, ecto, outer, meso, middle. All right. So it floats in amnion. So an amniotic fluid. Good grief. English is my first language. Hey. So we get the formation of the umbilical, we get the formation of the placenta, and we get organogenesis. So the start of the forming of organs. Limb formation begins at around about 4 weeks. Heartbeat begins then as well. Okay, human form is noticeable at 8 weeks. Okay, that's about as early as you're going to see. Cool. All right, so fetal stage, basically 8 weeks until birth. Continued growth by hyperplasia and hypertrophy. So hypertrophy, muscle growth. So cephalocoidal and proximodistal. Good grief, I haven't even spelled that right. That's terrible. Okay, so basically head to toe or top down, cephalocoidal, okay, and proximodistal, so from inside to out, so from close to far. We start to see plasticity, so it can actually, and we see first reflexive action, so the opening and closing of hands. Okay, and we start to see when the mouth moving as well. Awesome experience. Strongly recommend it. If you get a chance to actually see videos of particularly this stage from ultrasounds, it is amazing. It's just like, oh my god, he's tiny little, itty bitty, and it's just starting to work. It's not even aware of working stuff out. It's just messing around. Okay, so fetal nourishment. So oxygen and nutrients are diffused between mother and child. Okay, that's where everything's being supplied from. There's no direct exchange of fluids. Okay, so that's important to understand. Absorption is through the umbilical cord and placenta. So the mother's environment will directly impact the child. Okay, so be aware of that. About the only thing you need to be aware of there is the 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 layers. So you've got the amnion, which is the inner layer, and you've got the chorion, which is the outer layer. Just know what they are, know what they mean. All right, so the first trimester, so this is your what are we at? Trimester, good grief, I've just drawn a complete mental blank. I think we run through it till about 8 weeks. So 0 to 4 weeks, like we said, it's a zygote, 0.2 centimeters in length. You start to see the formation and the development of the gastrointestinal tract, heart, nervous system, spinal cord, and lungs. At 8 weeks, we transition to being an embryo, so just over 2.5 centimeters long. Start to see the development of the eyes, ears, mouth, face, and toe buds, arms and legs. The brain continues to form. We see fetal heartbeat is now detectable. Okay, so that's when you get your Doppler scanner, and you can put it over the, run it over the woman's belly, and you can now hear the heartbeat. Okay. Oh, sorry, 12 weeks. Good grief, that's terrible. I should know that. 8 to 12 weeks, 7.5 to 7.5 centimeters, 50 grams, thereabouts. It's a fetus. So we've gone from being an embryo to being a fetus. We see development of fingerprints. Don't ask me how they know that. Movement of arms and legs. They can smile, frown, suck, and swallow. Sex is distinguishable. So this is when you can go in and they'll be able to tell you, hopefully, whether your child is going to be a boy or a girl. And they can urinate, apparently. So there you go. Second trimester. Okay, so 12 through to 24. Week 16 to week 20, so we now see we're getting up to 10 to 15 centimeters in size and around about 100 grams or more. Skin is transparent. They've got downy hair on them. Fingernails and toenails there. There should be a strong heartbeat, and you should see something that resembles coordinated movement. They can kick. 20 to 24 weeks, 30 centimeters, almost half a kilo in weight. Heartbeat is strong. Hopefully they can apparently get hiccups. I'm not sure how you work that out, but anyway, and you'll see thumb sucking. There's now the formation of hair, eyelashes, and eyebrows. And then we're on to our 24-28 week mark. 35.5 centimeters and 700 grams. Skin is wrinkled and covered in vernix, which is, what's the easiest way to explain this? Protective coating. Don't know how else. Very, very thin hair. And development, the eyes are open, there's a strong grip, and strong in relative terms, obviously, and waste is collecting in the bowel. Third trimester, this is where things get interesting. Okay, so what are we at there? 28 weeks, 24 to 28 weeks, and then through until 36 plus, depending on how long the pregnancy runs for. 40.6 centimeters or 40 odd centimeters, 1.5 kilos. You start to see the addition of body fat. They're very active. Okay, rudimentary breathing movements. Obviously, they can't breathe yet because they're in a fluid-filled sac. All right, so 32 to 36 weeks, they should be around about 45 centimeters long, 2.2 kilos or more or less. So this is where it can be quite, you can get massive changes in development at this point. Okay, some kids come out really, really big, others just come out really, really small. Okay, so they respond to sounds. There's periods of sleeping and wakefulness. Bones of the head are soft and flexible, so this is in preparation for the actual birth itself. And they may assume the birth position, so curled up in that what we would term the fetal position. Okay, and rotating, so they're head down. 36 to 40 weeks, so it could be as early as 36, could be as long as 40. It is what it is. Premature is a problem, but So around about 50 centimeters and a weight around about 3 kilograms. Skin is less wrinkled. The vernix is thickening. Lanugo, so we've got hair all over the body. It's almost gone now. And we start to gain, this child starts to gain immunities from the mother, and the body fat is increasing. Right, so genetic abnormalities. So chromosome number mutations, they are what things that leads to Down syndrome. So instead of 46, it's got 47. Chromosome structure mutations. So the incorrect chromosome structure is going to lead to an incorrect assembly of a protein, basically because it's a fault in the program, and that is what leads to the creation of an incorrect protein, which is not right, unfortunately. And that's how sickle cell anemia evolves in. Genetic mutations, chondroplasia, mental blank, can't remember what that is. Don't shoot me on that one. Cool. So medical conditions that affect development. So sexually transmitted disease, rubella, German measles, and gestational diabetes. They're probably the 3 big ones that you want to know for the exam. Tetrogens. So these are artificial toxins that cause defects. Alcohol has been shown to create or to cause something called fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So basically it starts to damage the child's brain during its formation, which then obviously impacts this child's life. Various illicit drugs, because you never quite know what you're taking, that's going to cause a problem because there's probably some things in there you really shouldn't have. Like, battery acid's no good for anybody, doesn't matter how you're taking it. Smoking, so it's a bad, it's not the best thing for adults, and it's definitely not the best thing for kids. Excess prescription drugs, so when you are pregnant, then obviously you do want to be very careful, because when they say you're eating for 2, they're not kidding. So everything that goes in basically will be transferred to some degree to your child. So prenatal factors that affect development. So maternal health and nutrition. So what mum has, that's what Bub's getting as well. So maternal stress, mental health, this is a big thing. It's massive. And it is so poorly managed because of the stigma around mental health. Okay, maternal age can be a factor as well. Too young's not really great. Too old can be high risk as well. And then you've got the one that's often overlooked, particularly in the Western world, is paternal factors. So dad actually does have an impact on unborn children, because obviously dad contributes to that environment, and that directly affects the child. So having that balance there in that cooperative environment is important. So birth, basically, this occurs in 3 stages. So stage 1 is contractions, and they're usually 15 to 20 minutes apart. Then you get dilation out to about 10 centimeters. Can last 6 to 12 hours. It can be really quick, or it can be really, really fast. Okay, it just depends on the person. So this is normally the point where you would start monitoring quite closely. Stage 2, baby begins to move, and cervix is fully dilated. So that's going to be different for every woman. Okay. This can be anything from 45 minutes to 1 hour, and it ends when the baby is fully exited. Finally, you've got afterbirth. So this is when the placenta and the umbilical cord are expelled, and it's usually 1 to 5 minutes post-birth. Depends on the person. That's quite if you were to look at minimum times for that, that's quite quick for the entire process. I do know others who have gone significantly longer than that. Okay, and it can be a very, very stressful process. So postnatal considerations. So premature birth can lead to development coordination disorder, which impacts the child across their lifespan. Postpartum depression, or postnatal depression as it's called, is a serious issue. You also have prenatal depression, which can be a major problem for mother and child. It is quite a challenging experience, particularly for mum, particularly if they're a new mum and you have never been through it before. So support is really, really important. The Apgar scale, it's a tool to determine the initial health of the child. So basically what you're looking for, so it's a 1 to 3 scale like you see here. You've got heart rate, respiration effort, muscle tone, body colour, and reflex irritability. So what we'd be looking for is, something in the order of 10 points. So we want them all up in the 2s. So good quick heart rate, good breathing with normal crying. Some kids cry, some kids don't. Muscle tone, we want it strong, active and smooth. Their entire body's a nice pink colour, and we get coughing and sneezing and maybe crying. Again, it depends on the child. All right, so what we covered. So we covered what happens during conception. We covered how the fetus develops. We looked at the factors that affect prenatal development. We look at what happens during birth, and then we got common problems with the prenatal stage. Let's do a bit of questions. How long is a trimester? So 12 to 14 weeks. At what point do we consider pregnancy to have begun? So that's when the zygote implants into the wall. Once you've got implantation, then we actually have a pregnancy. What's the first stage of a human called? So that would be a zygote. Okay, what are tetrogens? So remembering those were toxins that have an impact on a child's development. Okay, and 3 types of genetic abnormality causes. So you can get alrighty. So genetic abnormality causes. Remembering there are genetic changes in genetic structure, changes in chromosome number, and finally our genetic mutations. Alright, so had a mental blank, had to check that up. Alrighty guys, so hope you had a good break. Let's get back into it. So moving along, so session 2 we've got here, might be week 2, week 3, depends on how it goes. So we're looking at infancy, 0 to 2 years. So this is our reflective and rudimentary phases, if you remember back to our Gallagher's hourglass model. So we're going to look at the physical development, perceptual development, motor development, and cognitive development. You're going to find these themes are repeated throughout each of these phases. All right. It seems to be about the easiest way of doing it, so let's roll. So physical development, so what we're looking at birth, we're looking at about 50 centimetres. By the time we get to 2 years, we're about 85 centimetres, almost a metre depending on the child. 3.5 kilos jumps up to about 12.5, something like. We go from 100 billion neurons. Our brain size increases by around about, reaches 25 to 75% of adult weight. Now a neural peak happens at around about 1 year. By about 2 years, we're moving towards what's called neural pruning. So basically, anything that the body finds it is not using, it starts trimming away to conserve energy. All right, so what's important here is that brain development, when it comes to things like activity and exercise, you can see from the photo there's a lot more going on. Okay, so it depends a lot on hereditary factors and on environmental. So we're relying on stimulus. Insufficient stimulus leads to poor development. And basically any unused pathways are going to get pruned during that, at around about that 2 year age bracket. Okay, so we need to make sure that with the very young kids that they are getting proper stimulus. They're getting the opportunities to see things, touch things, smell things, taste things, do things, experience things. That old saying about wrapping kids in cotton wool, and that's really not healthy for a child. Okay, they need to learn by doing. So infants can sleep up to 18 hours a day, if you're lucky. As most parents will know, some kids do, some kids don't. They go through phases of doing stuff. Some infants struggle to establish a sleep pattern. Okay, so that's why establishing these routines when they're young is very important. Okay, sleep's essential for the physical repair, synaptic refinement, and it also helps clear out neural waste. So, yeah, it's basically, I mean, there's a lot going on. A lot of waste products, and your body needs time to clear those out, hence all the sleeping. Approximately half of all infants' sleep is REM sleep. Okay, so yeah, cool. Nutrition-wise, right, they can suck, they can chew, they can swallow. They begin to eat solid-ish food by this point. And really, I mean, for most kids now, it's a mix of breast and bottle. That's generally been the recommendation, but at the end of the day, you sort of have to deal with the environment that you're in. Some places you don't have access to bottled milk. It may be all breast, or depending on mum's situation, you may be forced down an all bottle road. So mixing nutritional sources is recommended, so that way you're getting a good spread of vitamins, minerals, carbs, proteins, etc. So they need that, and they need diversity to develop senses of taste and all that sort of thing. All right, perceptual development. So we're going to look at the difference between perception versus sensation. So a sensation is the activation of neurons created by a stimulus. So I feel the sensation of touch as I run my finger down my arm. And that's a sensation. The perception is the interpretation that tells me there's something running down my arm. That's my brain interpreting the sensation to perceive the presence of something moving down my arm. So perception changes with experience. The more experience I get, the more accurate my perceptions become. So much so that we learn to do things by feel alone, by sound, we can recognize things by sound, we can recognize things by sight. So perception improves with experience. So perceptual development, so their sight, they have focus. We see the beginnings of depth perception. So they're actually able to start judging distances. And they can track an occluded object by the time they're about 2. So they can, there's a barrier there, something moves from left to right and passes behind the barrier, they can track that and start to work out that, this is in front of that. So the hand is in front of the bottle moves behind the hand, and it comes out the other side. So sounds, they can detect loudness, direction and pitch. So this is the one you'll see people do that, and the child will actually turn their head to look to try to work out where it's coming from. Taste and smell. So they begin to explore new tastes and new smells. So this is where dietary variety becomes important. Touch and pain, they understand that, they respond to pain, they explore things with the idea of sensation of touch. And this is really about their only real way of gaining an awareness of what not to do. If it hurts, therefore there's the mind triggers the response to say, no, don't do that again, that hurt. Motor development, right, so we're in that reflexive and rudimentary phases, right? So that's where we are. We're right down the bottom of the hourglass, okay? So we've done the information decoding we go through the information encoding and decoding stages and into the reflexive and rudimentary motor controls. So reflexive or survival movements, so the Moro reflex and the startle reflex, so that's that one, they are frightened or surprised, searching, so that's when we touch on the side of the mouth and they turn, and sucking, obviously we see that as well. Palmar grasping, so touch in the hand and they close their hand on it. The Babinski, which is where the foot tries to wrap around the object, and then we go to the plantar. Babinski is where they flex the foot, and the plantar grasping is where the foot starts to try to lock over the item that's touching on the foot. Tonic neck, so 0 to 6 months, so we'll see the neck moving in the opposite direction as they seek to correct balance. and then after 6 months we see symmetrical movements. So and postural reflexes as well. So sitting, so able to sit, able to start learning to control their position in space by themselves. So they're starting to get enough strength to be able to do that. The Moro and the startle. So the Moro basically, so we hold the baby in the supine position, so on their back, supporting the head, and abruptly lower the body about 2 feet. The arms and legs extend. They're probably not going to be real happy about you when you do this. Okay. The startle reflex, so similar to the Moro, but initiated by a sudden noise or a loud stimulus. And when they get that, okay, so birth up to about 4 months. So you do need to know this. You need to understand what they are. So searching and suckling. So I've described that already. So touching them on the side of the mouth, and they'll start looking or start trying to move around to get to that, what is perceived as a nipple. Palmar grasp. Yep. So it begins at 32 weeks and progresses onwards. Disappears by about 3 or 4 months. They, you know, once they gain conscious control of it, then they don't do it subconsciously anymore. The Babinski, so basically dragging a something along the bottom of the foot, and the toes will extend. Whereas a negative, we'll see the plantar reflex, so there'll be like a grasping type motion. All right. Boom, righto. Tonic neck, right? So yep, the kung fu fighting stance, asymmetric tonic neck reflex. So basically, they will turn and look, and the head. So if that arm will extend, I will look that way, and that one will happen, and then vice versa when I want to go the other way. Tonic labyrinthine reflex. So basically, this is the crawl reflex. Okay, so you'll come across that. Postural reflexes, so labyrinthine and optical riding. So basically, the child starts to gain control of their head, and they'll want to look up and look where things are. Pull-ups, they'll be trying to pull themselves up into a standing position. Parachute and propping, so when they're the fall reflex, so they'll try to flare out. Neck and body riding, then we're into crawling, primary stepping, and also the swim reflex. Okay, basically what you'd see in doggy paddle. Cannot suggest or recommend enough getting them into the pool early. Right, so labyrinthine and optical riding, so yeah, basically they're tilted to the side and their head will try to stay vertical. Okay, so their head will try to counteract the tilt to keep them upright. Okay, pull-up reflex, you'll see the child, you'll be able to grab the hands and they will try to pull themselves up. Not you pulling them, but them actually trying to pull themselves up. Parachuting and propping, so it's a fall response. So as they're heading towards the ground, they will flare out as trying to protect. And then you'll be able to see the crawling reflex, so they'll, off the ground, they'll actually try to move on their own. And if you tiny little bit of pressure on the ground, they'll actually be able to get that crawling response. And then the swim response, exactly the same, supported in the water, and they'll naturally be able to start that swimming type idea. That's the chart of it. You will come across it in your book. These are just vague indications of time periods. Cool. Cognitive development. Okay, so Piaget's model. Okay, it's a 4-stage development model. It does kind of overlap with Gala-Hughes hourglass. All right, so our first one is our sensor motor stage, and we've got pre-operational stage from 2 to 7, concrete operational stage, they've grasped some basic ideas, and then formal operational stage is when we're reaching into adult reasoning or starting to get there. So obviously we're in the sensory motor stage now, it's 0 to 2 years. Begins with exploring the world around them through actions. So we get primary, secondary, and tertiary development. And the idea of exploring reactions. So I push something and it falls over. And then they start to explore the idea of like, okay, well, if I push on this, that falls over. Maybe so I push on this falls over, and then mum comes, or dad comes. You know, if I yell or I scream or I cry, I get attention. So these ideas start to, so tertiary circular reactions, 12 to 18 months, with seeing the development of novelty and curiosity. So they, you know, a block can be made to fall, you can spin it, you can hit it, you can do strange, you know, you can do things with it, you can use other tools to do things with it. And then internalizing schemes, so not the best way of phrasing it in my opinion, but they'll see that old monkey see, monkey do, so they'll see one of their playmates or classmates do something, and then they'll have to do it too, because it looked like fun, or because it got that child a desired result. So cognitive milestones basically in this stage. So birth, so the infant brain's got, like we said, over 1 billion neurons. They'll use their senses to learn, yeah. So we can start seeing the beginning of memory and problem solving, repeating actions, crying, cooing, smiling, anger, the basics of emotions as they start to mirror what they see in their parents when they, you know, as their vision develops. Okay. 4 to 9 months, we're seeing the idea of cause and effect. They're starting to reach for objects. They're becoming bored if they're left alone and they don't have something to do. Peekaboo is a favourite at this stage. And the novelty of toys and repeated actions. They're starting to learn they're learning to identify faces, and they're also learning how to interpret facial expressions. So 9 to 12 months, so they're able to search for partly hidden objects, so they're able to work out where things are. Moving objects to get to things becomes they'll start to develop a food preference at this stage, so diversity in food is important. They identify their name. They're starting to get that idea that they are this series of sounds. They'll smile at themselves in the mirror. They'll start to learn to imitate gestures. They'll react to changes in routine. Laughing is something that we start to see here, and the idea of books. Okay, so take a break and we'll move on to the next bit. Alrighty guys, so we're back into it again. So session 3, this may occur in week 3, week 4, depending on how they break it up. So 2 to 6 years old, this is our fundamental movement phase. So if you're dealing with our PUPS program, this is when that's happening. Okay, so we'll look at the physical development, perceptual development, motor development, cognitive development, exactly the same as what we did for the last session. So their sleep will increase. You'll hopefully getting to about 11-12 hours per night. Shortages can lead to behavioural and developmental issues. Okay, and this can affect them for extended periods of time afterwards. Okay, if they're being deprived of sleep in these early stages, it is really, really not good for them. Okay, nutrition, poor nutrition can impact development. Okay, we see this unfortunately quite severely. You do see it we see it in Zambia with some of the kids there. And if they are deprived of nutrition at a very young age, then that will have lifelong effects. So much so that we've got kids there that are 16, 17 years old and they're weighing in like 40 kilos. It is truly scary. Okay, so acute effects can cause chronic conditions. Okay, so if they're deprived of food, even for a short time during this stage of their development, that can lead to chronic effects if it is not rapidly turned around. The first 4 years is where it's worst for them. Okay, so weight, really they're gaining 2 to 4.5 kilos per year, depends on the child, depends on the environment, depends on conditions. But if they're gaining less than 2 kilos a year, we could potentially have a problem there. Growth rate of around about 6.5 centimeters per year, again depending on the child, and we should be seeing muscle tissue should be around about 25% of body weight. Okay, so it's important to be across this if you are dealing with kids in this age range. So brain, we're starting to see myelination occurring. So myelination, as you'll remember from, or as you may be aware from anatomy and physiology, that's when the axons, the nerve fibers, are being encased and basically insulated, for lack of a better way of explaining it. This is mostly complete by about the age of 6. Okay, so this is speeding up the transmission of those nerve impulses. Synaptic pruning is still in progress. The brain is about 90% of an adult weight by the end of 6 years. So most of those fundamental frameworks has been laid down by then, which is why this stage of development is so important. Okay, we're seeing dynamic bone growth. Growth is in response to stress, so weight-bearing exercises is critical. Okay, whether that's body weight, whether they get into like these sorts of activity programs like the PUPS program or that sort of thing, or Ollie for Kids, they're starting to, the body will respond to the stimulus it is given. So the more dynamic this environment is for them, the better. Motor skill competence is starting, so play and functional movement skills. So this is as I said, this is forms of foundation of our PUPS program. This is why we've got it. Okay, so play should be frequent, stress-free, and relatively unstructured. Okay, motor skill competence, so mastery of fine and gross motor skills that enables participation in and performance of activities. Okay, so they need, yes, there's got to be structure, a progression to it, but we need a high degree of flexibility and movement in there for them to experience different stimuli. Fundamental movement skills are the means to develop motor skill competence. Okay, they are not learned innately. They must be taught. Okay, that's important. Okay, so you do need to understand that idea because this will come up in your exam. So motor development wise, we're seeing the fundamental movement skills. So we've got 3 types. We've got stability, locomotion, and manipulation / object control. When we're talking about stability, we're talking balancing, static and dynamic, bending, rotation, and landings. Locomotion, we're looking at walking, running, hopping, skipping, galloping, sprinting, and leaping. Funnily enough, are we noticing a trend here? And then we've got so in our object manipulation, we've got rolling ball, we've got throwing, overhand and underarm, we've got catching, we've got dribbling, which is bouncing the ball, and kicking and striking. So most of these, we would do these in a warm-up. Balancing skills, hop lunges, jump lunges, running backwards, sidestepping, skipping, galloping, all this sort of stuff. These are quite often part of our warm-ups. These are things that our youth should be learning in this 2 to 6 age range. This is where they need to develop mastery of that. So stages of functional movement skills. So our initial, where we're seeing crude and uncoordinated attempts, basic motor patterns at times, and inconsistent performance. So sometimes they can get it right, other times they can't. Okay, emerging patterns. So we can start to see the skill being performed occasionally, but they still need to focus on it and think about it. And then finally, we get into proficient development, where they're comfortable with the skill. They don't need to really concentrate on it. They simply do it. Okay, it is smooth, it's controlled, and what we would consider mastery. Okay, but we need this established by the time they're 6, 10 at the latest. Okay, so constraints with the functional movement screen, or functional movement skills, sorry. So individual constraints are things like age, weight, limb length, strength, generating different amounts of force, coordination, balance, motivation, illness, disabilities. Okay, so there are individual constraints. Our task constraints are the step or hop motion pattern, the movement, and moving to music, and introducing different environment or different variables into that. So rules would be one of those variables. And finally, environmental constraints, so temperature, surfaces of the floor, when we're discouraging kids from doing things, gender, yeah, we still have gender stereotyping, which kind of sucks. Cultural impacts, so this is not particularly common in Australia, for example, but you do see it in other countries. when they're not being taught how to do something, they're just expected to know how to do it, and they're not given the opportunities to practice. So we see this all the time in coaches. They give a set of instructions, get the kids to go away, and 10 seconds later they've got them all back again. They need time, and different kids need different amounts of time. So we need to be reducing the amount of stuff we're trying to cover in a lesson and simply giving them time to practice and learn. All right, so cognitive development. So we're in this pre-operational stage now. So 2 to 7 years old. So in the pre-operational stage, Piaget's second stage, so they're viewing the world in pictures and images. Okay? So you're going to have much better results through visualization and through being able to show them what you want. Okay, so demonstrations or videos or whatever. They begin to explore the idea of reasoning, consequences, and the idea of linked actions. So the very start of what we call chaining. Okay, I do this and this happens. Okay, so basic principles. Somebody grabs me, I need to target the thumb. So I simply turn toward, I go in the direction of the thumb. There's the thumb, that's where I need to go. Okay, that sort of conceptual type stuff they're going to begin to work with. Okay, it's dominated by imagination. Reality is, we're not constrained by reality at this point. You know, unicorns are real, Santa Claus, etc. So it's important to utilize that when you're training and coaching. We do eventually get to the point where we've got reversible mental action. They can start to visualize what's going to happen and take it back. So they can begin to create plans and ideas and work with the idea of tactics. They're egocentric. Okay, so they're self-focused and they can't really grasp the other person's view yet. Again, this is being learned, so we need to take time to explain that to them and to make them aware. Animism, so this is where innate objects take on a life of their own. Imaginary friends, talking to the toys, etc. They're real, they have thoughts and feelings, etc. They are able to stay focused for a little bit longer. It increases as they go along. Memory they can usually remember up to 7 digits. Okay, but again, this is learned, so it has to be practiced. Beginning to identify countable and measurable differences. The difference in the score. Okay, so that's they're able to identify that and the idea of less and more. Okay, so perceptual development. So we see increased ability to interpret information. They're able to use information to form deductions. If I do this, this happens. Okay. They develop lateral dominance, so they develop their right or left side preference. And they're able to distinguish different shapes, sizes, colors, and different forms. Okay, so that's a useful thing. And like I say, the ability depends greatly on the individual and on their stimulation in their environment. They begin to develop self-control and learning interpersonal skills. So this is where something like wrestling is really important because it teaches them to accept the idea of loss and that that's okay. Loss, failure, success. I try, I practice, I work hard and I get results. This is an important lesson for a child to learn. All right, righto, take another break and we will get back into the next bit. Alrighty, into it we go. So session 4, so factors which affect development. So we've got individual factors, environmental, we've got task factors, and then finally we just want to look at how we assess development. How are we going to measure the progression, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. So our physical development, what we're looking at, height, weight, development relative to age. Okay, and then we've got physical conditions. Okay, so yeah, we'll get into those in a little bit. Mentally speaking, so their ability to learn things, their mental health, their emotional regulation, their social skills. Again, this is an important part when you're doing running programs, particularly for young people. The socialization aspect is really important. A person becomes a person among people. And they need to learn how to interact with their peers and how to become a functional member of society. Okay. Environmental, so we're talking about the things here like the cultural environment, social upbringing and the situation. Okay, their activity environment is critical. They have to be properly stimulated. If they're not getting enough to do, they will not develop the right kind of worldview. If things are too easy, then it's no fun and it's boring and nothing matters. If it's too hard, then it's no fun and everything's pointless and nothing matters. So we've got to find a happy medium here where they're getting enough challenge to be stimulated and encouraged, but not enough to be, to get into a depressive or a negative cycle. But at the same time, winning all the time doesn't work, and not having a winner and a loser, well, that doesn't equip you for life. You will always have good days and bad days. Someone's going to get that job and you won't get it. That is part of life. So it's important as they're growing that they learn to process all this and to process it in a positive way. Gender typing, what we're talking about here, whether it's real or perceived, is irrelevant. The fact of the matter is, as we see in the photo, girls are wearing dresses, boys are wearing pants. It may just be a thing. Just most girls like to wear dresses or skirts or whatever. It doesn't necessarily impact whether or not a male or female can play a certain sport or be good or bad at it. There are differences between genders. These are genetic differences. This is simply the way this person is. That's neither good, bad, or otherwise. It's simply the way they are, and we need to be around that and be aware that, okay, there may be gender typing, but it doesn't necessarily impact on their ability to enjoy what they do. Okay? Weather conditions do have an impact. All right, if you grow up in a place that's stinking hot, 80% humidity all the time, and you suddenly come to a place that your body will evolve differently or adjust differently to suit that, as opposed to somebody who grows up in a place where it never gets above 20 degrees Celsius. That's just the way you're going to be. You take somebody who's lived in Victoria their entire life, maybe gets 1 or 2 40-degree days a year, almost never sees serious humidity. You take them and you fly them into Singapore in the middle of build-up at the start, just before wet season. They're going to hate life, okay? Sorry, that's just reality, okay? It will be a shock to the system. The equipment, the facilities that they're used to working with, that affects the stimulus that they receive, which will impact their development. Then we see dominant attitudes. These are usually learned from society, our families, our peers, that sort of thing. So the task. So task perception. Is it impossible? Is it hard? Is it too easy? And that can change with your generation. When I was growing up, I'd never met anyone who'd been to an Olympian or a Commonwealth Games athlete. Didn't know anybody who'd met an Olympian or a Commonwealth Games athlete. My daughter grew up in a world where she's met these people. She was meeting them when she was, 6, 8, 10 years old. That was normal. She knew people who've won Olympic Olympic silver medals. She'd known people who've gone to an Olympics, who've gone to World Championships, who've done all this stuff, not just in her sport, but in others. So the idea that you could do this it's not a pipe dream. This is quite achievable. I know people who've done it. Okay? So your perception of what is possible and what is not, growing up where I was in the way I did, going to an Olympics is, forget it, you don't have a prayer, that's impossible. But for her, going to World Championships or going to an Olympics, going to World Championships was not a big deal. She's rolled up against people who've done it. What's the big deal? So it's important to consider these things, how the child, what they perceive. Quite often they will make reality, okay? If you think it's impossible, if you don't believe you can do it, then you won't be able to do it. So appropriate, and it fits within the framework. So obviously, it's a hard conversation to have as a coach when you have to sit down and say to a kid, look, realistically, you might get there but the chances of you winning are pretty slim. You know, chance of you even getting on the podium are virtually non-existent. You've simply come into this game too old. You know, sorry, them's the breaks. Not saying don't try, not saying don't go and give it your best, by all means, but be mentally and emotionally prepared for the reality, which is these people have been at this for a very long time. Okay? It has to make sense, it's got to have purpose, and to build that idea of that I can do this. And then we also, when we're goal setting and we're helping people with goal setting, remember, specific, measurable, accurate, realistic, and time-based. Okay? And obviously, going back to one of the other lectures that you run into, that SMART goals, they have a specific acronym that you must remember for it, so be aware of that. So measuring development, so there is something called the Movement Assessment Battery for Children, MABC2. You will run across this in your labs, you do have to know it. It's basically 8 mini tests. They're looking at fine and gross motor skills, looking at coordination, and some subjective. Some are subjective. It's highly generalized. There's lots of other movement screens available. Depends on which country you're in. Strength tests may be appropriate if the data is available. But above all, when you're doing testing or screening, what are you testing for? Always be aware of that. What are we looking for? You know, if it's not giving you valuable data that you're going to use, then why are we doing it? All right, cool. That's basically all there is on that. Take a break and we'll get back into it now. Okie dokie. So we're back into it. Right, so section 5 should be about week 5, maybe week 6, depends on when they throw your mid-semester break in. So late childhood we're talking about, so 6 years to 10. It varies a little bit. So basically this will take us through till the start of puberty. So again, we're looking at physical development, perceptual development, motor development, cognitive development. All right, let's get into it. Physical development, again, sleep, we're looking at 11 to 12 hours per night. Different kids need different amounts of sleep. Don't get locked in by any means to 11 to 12. What's important is quality of sleep. Okay, poor nutrition again can still impact development at this stage. Acute effects can become chronic conditions. We're looking at a weight gain 2.5 to 3.2 kilos per year, plus or minus. Again, be aware of body composition. Height, we're looking at an increase of 5 to 7.5 centimeters per year. Muscle tissue continues to increase during this time. Brain, so the brain size has stabilized. We've reached full size, we just don't have full development yet. Prefrontal cortex continues to development. So this is the reasoning in the higher functions. Okay, myelination continues, as does synaptic pruning. So we're still refining everything down. Remember, the more active you keep the mind, the more they retain those neural pathways. So stimulus decreases the amount of neural pruning. Okay, so bones. So ossification continues. So the thickening of bone and the heart and the increase in density. So growth is in response to stress, so weight bearing again is critical. Okay, so that old thing of, oh no, kids shouldn't weight lift. No, kids should weight lift. Resistance training is your friend. Okay, with the provision, suitable weights, suitable reps, good technique, properly supervised. Say that again, properly supervised. Not just by dad in the gym, going for max reps every time. Okay, ASCA, S&C coaches or sports scientists, properly qualified staff. Okay, yeah, because it does my head, because I see it all the time. All right, perceptual development. So perception continues to grow. So remember, perception is the ability to interpret sensation. Improved by experience. Ability to track objects in motion, estimate force, and finer controls continue to improve. So this is where we're talking about what we mean, hand-eye coordination, hand or eye-foot coordination, whole body movements. You know, static and dynamic visual acuity improve rapidly. So the ability of the child to track and correlate movement with motion continues to improve. Errors in visual assessment decrease until maturity at around about age 12. Okay, kinesthetic perception is developing and continues to improve. So that's our sense of where our body is in space. Okay, again, these can be improved by participation in sport and structured programs such as our Olympic lifting and wrestling and basketball, football, whatever. Doesn't matter. All these different stimuli create different kinds of change, and that all starts to improve. But again, going back to these fundamental movement skills, they need to be established before they're 6. All right, so specialization in sport at different ages. So under 12, 80% of the time should be spent in other sports other than their key sport. Okay, if their main interest is, say, wrestling, for example, we want them to go and do other things. Especially during this stage, get them moving around. But that said, if they want to play, hey, let them play. Okay, 13 to 15 years should be about 50-50. Finally, when they hit about 16 years, then we should be moving them across into, or they should be hopefully moving across into what will be their primary discipline. This can be really hard because of the age that some of our kids need to reach top level by. That doesn't really work. Okay, but still we want them to be involved in other sports. So this is where their involvement in phys ed at school or school sporting programs, or having fun with their mates, going down and playing basketball down the park on the weekend just because they can, or going swimming, swimming in off season. Why our strength and conditioning programs hinge heavily on Olympic lifting, or those sorts of things, because it's involving them in a different sport other than what they're used to doing. All right, so motor development, let's go. So our motor development, we're in the specialized movement phase. Okay, so our functional movement skills should be combined and being refined into specialist tasks. Okay, so they've learned the basics of how to throw. Now they should be learning actual throwing mechanics in a game situation. Okay, it is a transitional stage, so foundation skills of games are developed here, and the knowledge of the starting concepts of rules and tactics. Okay, biobanding may be appropriate in this stage. Okay, so biobanding we will get into later on. Basically, it's grouping kids by developmental age and weight. So they're not drastically outmatched by a kid, you've got one kid who's 40 and you've got another kid who's 80 kilos, that is. Physical literacy is still developing at this point. So motor development readiness. Okay, so readiness is the combination of a number of factors. First, we've got the ability of the learner, we've got the environmental context that they're in, and then we've got the demands of the task. If any one of those is too much, you will not get good readiness. Okay? It doesn't matter what kind of abilities they've got. If the task demands are too much, the person will not be properly prepared. If they've got, even if they're in their own environment, they've got the ability, but the demand of that task, what you're asking them to do. So we take a child who's never competed at elite level, and we throw them up against the world champion in their age and weight division. It doesn't matter if it's on their home ground or not, that kid's going to get schooled badly. Okay? Because they're not up to the task demand. You're asking too much from this person. Okay? It's like taking a kid who's just got their learners, sticking them in a Formula One racing car and go, here you go, beat Ayrton Senna. It is not going to happen. Doesn't matter how much natural ability this kid has got. If he has never even sat in a Formula One racing car or even driven a car, period, they're not gonna win. Logic tells you that this is the case. Yeah? It will not end well. They are not ready. So we have to get a bit of balance happening here, where we've got the abilities of the learner, the demands of the task, and the environment all working together to prepare this person for whatever level of task you want them to do. So readiness. So the task demands, these can be physical readiness and also skill development. There's a lot more we can throw in there as well. Ability of the learner. So the physical literacy, their cognitive ability, their knowledge of the game, their desire to participate. Okay, that's the big one. Environmental, that it's a suitable environment, they got suitable equipment, and there's a safe, fun, and inclusive environment. Okay, if they do not feel safe there, they do not feel welcome, then they will not want to participate. Okay, we see this again and again. Even if the competition is, for them, would be easy, they should just romp all over it. If they don't feel safe there, they're not going to perform well, and they're just going to want to get the hell out of there. So our cognitive development, so we're in the concrete operational phase now. So this is 7 to 11 years old. So remember back to Piaget's model and to Gallagher's hourglass, this is where we're at. So a concrete operational stage, so Piaget's third, they can classify things based by quantity and similarities. Okay, so men, women, boys, girls, 15 years old, 17 years old, 12, etc. They can develop their own ideas, groups, and they can reason out logical arguments. Okay, again, important to practice this with them. Okay, from a coaching viewpoint, this is when we want to challenge them to start having an input into their own training. What do you think you should do? How do you think you should approach this problem? Why you've got a reason, you want to do something, that's fine. Give me a reason. Give me the logic and the reasoning behind what you want to do and show me that it can work. Okay, memory continues to improve. Development is greatly impacted by culture and environment. You need a stimulating environment, a challenging environment. Okay, these guys and girls want to be challenged. They do not want it handed to them on a silver platter. Okay, they can understand memory and develop strategies, as we said. So this is a great opportunity for them, and particularly to develop, if you're developing athletes or young players, this is a great time because they can start to come up with some really funky stuff. Okay, improvements in self-control, they should be able to, by now, they should be able to start to regulate and manage their own behavior. We should see improvements in reasoning, intelligence, critical thinking, and they should be improving all the time. Increased self-identity and group identification. So they will start hunting around for their place in the world. Okay. Unfortunately, this is when we start to see the things like, we're going for our gender identities and, cultural identities and racial identity, etc., etc., etc. So it's really important that we're supportive there, but also at the same time, you're just you. It's okay to be you. Whether you're black, white, green, blue, yellow, whatever, your gender identity, your sexual persuasion, whatever, makes no difference to the game. And it makes almost no difference to 90% of society. What's important is how you are as a person. All right, that's that section all done, and we will move on to the next one. Take a rest, grab a coffee, and we'll get it. Alrighty, so we're back into it. So session 6, so this will probably be after your mid-semester break. And we're looking at adolescence, so let's get cracking. So adolescence, 12 to 18 years old. This varies depending on when the child hits puberty, but we're not really talking about puberty, we're talking about adolescence, which is a developmental thing as opposed to simply a biological thing. So we do need to consider physical development. We'll look at perceptual development, motor development, cognitive development, exactly what we've done with all the previous phases. So let's get cracking on that. So physical development, we're talking about the onset of puberty. So we're looking at the genotype and the phenotype. So these are, your genotype is hereditary and it's fixed by your biology. Okay. Phenotype is influenced by your society and environment. Sleep-wise, we're looking 10 to 12 hours sleep, maybe not, a bit more, a bit less. Sleep issues are not uncommon during this phase, okay, because there's so much going on in the body, so many changes because of the hormonal activity that needs to happen here. Nutrition can become a severe problem at this stage. Sometimes partly because of the amount of change that's happening, particularly with young boys. The amount of food they will go through is really quite amazing. If you have young girls who are also high-level athletes, they will go through a phenomenal amount of food. Okay, so, and this is where we need to make sure that we're getting good food choices. Okay, and if they haven't already learned basic cooking and nutrition, how to sort of take care of themselves, this can be a big problem when they as they get older. Weight, we're looking 2.5 to 3.2 kilos per year increase. Height varies heavily. Eating disorders and disordered eating are very, very common. It is even worse in weight division sports, or if they're involved in sports where physical appearance matters. Okay, then we see higher instances of disordered eating and the onset of eating disorders on the back end of that. Growth hormone triggers. Yeah, growth hormone triggers the onset. So follicle stimulating hormone. Growth hormone, yeah. So GRNH, gonad releasing hormone, then triggers follicle stimulating hormone, which is so on and so on and so forth. It just cascades down. So that all happens at this stage. We'll cover that in biology, in Anat and Phys, and also in Anat and Phys 2 in second semester. Don't stress too much about it. You just need to know that growth hormone triggers the onset of puberty. Cool. So physical development, we start to see the sex characteristics becoming prominent. So particularly with the girls, we start to see the development of breast and the shift to a more feminine shape in some girls. Menstruation begins in females. Males, this is the first nocturnal emission, or the first wet dream, first ejaculation. Cardiovascular output increases linearly with age. So it's basically been increasing the entire time, and it tends to, it finishes with the end of puberty, roughly, but not entirely. Okay, we've still got some development capacity in there. The brain, we've got extensive remodeling. So neural pruning is still ongoing here. Increased linkages, so we see the corpus callosum, which is the link between left and right hemispheres. And myelination continues to increase because there is now more refined pathways. The body now starts to improve those connections and improve those transmission speeds. Physical changes in males, so sequence of puberty. So we get testicular and penis enlargement. We get a growth spurt, we see pubic hair formation, we see ancillary hair formation, and then we start to see deepening of the voice, and then production of mature sperm, and finally facial hair and increased body hair, to finally, hopefully, arrive at a fully developed male. Guys tend to hit puberty later than girls. Okay, that said, you get some kids that hit it really early and they just shoot up like bean poles, and they're built like tanks by the time they're 15, and you see others who don't start to really grow until they're 17, and suddenly in 12 months they're fully developed. And you're like, holy, okay. So depends on the individual. Physical changes in females, so we still see a growth spurt, we see breast and bud development, we see pubic hair development, growth of the genitalia, okay, and maturation. Axillary hair and menarche, so this is the first menstrual flow. By the end of it, they're mature ova and capacity of to become pregnant, and we see slight development in the voice, and we may or may not see acne, depends on the child, and that goes for the males as well. Guys tend to get acne a lot worse than girls, but a lot of that comes down to diet as well. Okay, perceptual development in this stage. So perception continues to improve. They're able to track objects in motion, estimate force, and control. Finer motor controls continue to improve. Static and dynamic visual acuity continue to improve rapidly. Errors in visual assessments, these are pretty much gone. By the time they hit puberty, we should see the end of this, or at the very least by about midway through. Kinesthetic perception is developing and continues to improve, but it can be messed with because of the speed up in growth. So this is where a lot of boys get really, really frustrated, because leading up to puberty, they've got everything going, they know exactly where they are in the world, they're moving really well, they're the top player in the game, and then overnight, suddenly they're double, Their arms and legs double the length that they were 6 months ago, and suddenly the kid cannot catch a ball to save his life. So the mind and the body needs to relearn how to function with this new, with this new ability, or that old saying, they don't know their own strength. In a lot of kids, that can actually literally be the case. They don't know their own strength. Suddenly they've doubled in strength overnight in their, as far as their mind's concerned, and they're not fully in control of it yet. Motor development, right? So we're in the specialization phase. We're in that sort of 11 to 13 and 14 plus years. So we're looking at the application and the lifelong utilization stages. Sorry, coffee time. All right, so motor skills undergo rapid change due to growth spurts. Okay, this is what we were alluding to before. Coordination can be an issue. Skill proficiency and comparability are important, which can be really, really difficult if you haven't established that willingness early on to identify and accept failure and loss, because now that can be a big thing for them. They don't understand, if you haven't established this idea that it's okay to get things wrong, it's okay to lose and to make mistakes, it doesn't matter, I just want you to learn from it and move forward. Okay, there's a high opt-out rate in sport here. Part of it's because the opportunities seem less. So this is where we go from a lot of social competition, and we're starting to refine down, and the ones that are getting picked out and given these extra opportunities are only the top one or two. And as soon as a child realizes that they will not reach that, then if they are not intrinsically motivated, if they have a fixed mindset, so they want the medal, they want the glory, when they realize they can't have it, then they just go, well, stuff it, what am I doing this for? Okay, it's really important that the game is fun, and the game's the reason why I'm playing, not I'm here for a medal. Okay, that's a big problem. All right, so motor peak is reached once puberty is complete. That's an important thing. Okay, if you've got a kid, they're doing great, then they hit puberty and suddenly they're just all over the place. It's important that you give them the support. That it's all right. Don't worry about it. Okay, don't stress. You just keep doing you, and we'll figure everything out on the other side. It's not a problem. Okay, burnout is common in youth athletes at this time. Okay, some of them, when they've started like 6 years old, by the time they get to 15, 16, that's a long grind. 10 years doing this, working your guts out. That's a long haul. It's not uncommon for a lot of them. This is sort of the way they go. So you need to be careful and mindful that when they're feeding back to you going, man, I just need a break. I want a year off. Fine, take a year off, dude. Not a problem. Okay, take 2, do whatever. You do you. It's the love of the game that'll bring them back. If you've developed that love of the game early and they genuinely love what they do, then they'll go back to it on their own. You don't have to do anything. And being an athlete, being a top level athlete is not the end of the world. Okay? Take your time at the top. If you get it, enjoy it. If you don't feel like doing it again, don't stress. It is a long way up that mountain. Okay, so balance of competition and training at this stage, about 60% training, about 40% competition. That is a difficult balance to achieve. Okay, the important thing here is the second one, always make time for fun and games. Okay, if the game is not fun, you're not going to keep doing it. Okay, if you hate the thing that you're doing, it's like a job, and for a lot of these kids at very young ages, it is a job. Okay, they are sponsored professional athletes. This is what they do. They will get up in the morning, they go to the gym, they train their guts out, they go to school, they finish school, they come back to the gym, they train their guts out again, they go home, they sleep, they get up the next morning and they do it again. And they're training for that one big competition a year. Okay, and then if they're going to something like World Championships, then we've got barrier tests in there, we've got camps that we've got to attend, we've got all this other stuff. This is hard work for these kids. Okay, so where you can, make it fun. take the pressure off. If there doesn't need to be a lot of pressure there, then don't put it there. Okay, the game needs to become fun. If the game becomes a job, then the game's no fun anymore. Lots and lots of mental health concerns at this point. Okay, so it's really important that we're all over these and that we're providing them with a fun, safe, happy environment and somewhere where they can express themselves. So if they're having an off day, they can come to you and they can rant and vent and do what they need to do. Developmental level, not chronological age. That's important. Okay, so this is getting back to that biobanding thing. Okay, so you got early and late developers. If you got an early developer, my daughter was an early developer, then they end up bigger and stronger and faster than other kids their age. They're able to put things together and they can, reach points that others can't. 14 years old going to under 17 world championships. That's not normal for a 14-year-old. If you get a late developer, it's not their fault. They may have started at the same age as the other person, but if they're not physically ready to do that, then they don't have a prayer. Okay? And there's nothing wrong with that. If they don't hit that development phase until they're 17, well, it may not be appropriate to send them to under 17 worlds. You may be better off biding your time and under 21, and this kid may kick goals. Okay, it's given that extra 12 months, and that suddenly you're dealing with a kid who's really well set up for this and is in full control of their body. Okay, biobanding, so this is grouping based on ability and size, not by age. Okay, so biobanding, let's get into it. So we can use it in competitions, so it decreases the injury rate, it improves the focus on technical skills, and it improves the engagement because I'm not getting just nailed to the wall by somebody who's 120 kilos when I'm only 60. It's just, crazy. Strength and conditioning, for us as strength and conditioning coaches, it helps us to tailor our program so we can make the training relevant and appropriate for the individual, and we can train them in groups where they are they're moving similar weights, doing similar activities. Talent identification. Okay, I am not a fan of talent identification. I prefer talent development. Somewhere in our top 10 kids is the person that we want to send to world championships. But we don't want to unnecessarily lose people who may grow to be the world champions that we want. Okay? I don't agree with talent. I mean, picking the person who always wins the gold medal. Historically speaking, that's not the best way of doing it. Okay, particularly with young kids. Okay, you're much better off going, okay, we're going to pick a group. And that's where this sort of thing, this biobanding thing starts to allow for. It allows us a bit more scope in there to wait until these people have actually finished going through puberty and we can get motor skill mastery out of them. Then we've got a chance we've now got a choice of 5 or 6 players who are all similar in terms of ability and age and weight, and now we can start to see who's really got the heart and the desire to be there, as opposed to simply picking the kid who's biggest and strongest. So our cognitive development, so we're in the formal operational stage, so this is 12 years and up, all right? And again, going back to our Piaget's model. So you need to know Piaget's. You need to know Gallagher's. Okay? Formal operational stage. 4th stage, last stage. Abstract thoughts. Okay? They're able to develop this idea of philosophy. Moral and ethical reasoning. They will have their views and their beliefs. Okay? So this is where those belief systems start to become really established. And they may very well deviate from their parents and yours. Don't stress. That's fine. Okay? They're able to reason and debate logical and theoretical arguments. So again, from a coaching viewpoint, we're able to give them much more autonomy, much more say in what they're doing. And they're able to look at what you're proposing and judge it on its merits and put forward alternative ideas and views. Okay? They're able to manage higher working and academic duties. So again, this enables us as coaches to have discussions with them in a more mature manner. heavily influenced by our peers and society, so be aware of that. Our opinion of our peers and our opinion and our position in society is important to us. Relationship development, and they begin to explore intimate relationships as well, so boyfriends and girlfriends and various other things. Okay, and also they're going to really start to exert their self-identity. So this is where we're going to see an increase in conflicts with parents and other authority figures. We need to have that positive, respectful relationship with them, so that they feel that it's okay to talk back, provided that it's done in a proper manner, in a mature manner. By all means, express your opinion. Say that you don't agree with it. That's great. You know, explain to me why you don't agree with it and why, and what's your alternative. Don't just give me problems. Provide the problem and your proposed solution, and then we can go through it as to why or why not it shouldn't happen or should happen. All right, okay, take a chill pill, and we will be back very, very shortly. Alrighty, so back into it. So session 7, we're looking at maturity now. So you'll hit this about week 8. Maybe week 7, depends on how it all shakes out. And what else you get hit with along the way. So, what we're looking at, again, physical development, perceptual development, motor skill development, and finally cognitive development. Same layout as before. Okay, so sleep-wise, 8 to 12 hours a night, depends on the person. All right, nutrition, overeating and alcohol abuse are common issues during this time. So is getting into illicit substances and that sort of thing. Experimentation you normally see during the latter stages of puberty, and then obviously we can get that manifesting through into maturity. So weight gain is commonly due to a sedentary lifestyle. So this is where those establishment of those fundamental movement skills in that 2 to 6 age range are important, because we want them to continue those habits into adulthood. And it's been shown that that does happen. 18 to 21 is physical prime. However, many other parts are still not fully developed, and it varies from person to person. Okay, so there is, while we say 18 to 21, that's... Alright, so physical development. So growth is mostly complete. So they've reached their peak height velocity already. Bones are mostly fully ossified. Fusion of epithelial plates. Epiphyseal plates. So they're the plates that form the caps of your long bones. And neural pruning is almost complete in the brain. So we've almost got a refined human brain happening here. Hopefully, as much as it can be. Perceptual development. Alright, so perceptual skills should be fully developed. So they should be able to sense and gain an awareness of their environment, and interpret those signals and sensations to draw down the correct conclusions. Mastery of hand-eye coordination. Okay, again, this is why it's so important back in this 2 to 6 age range to develop that hand-eye coordination early, so that by this time it's fully developed and they've got mastery of it. This is why we see kids, adults, struggling to catch a ball and to do these sorts of things. Okay, sensory inputs and processing are all well established. Okay, so we've got a fully developed sense of taste and, oops, I shouldn't have done that. There we go, right. Cool, so fully developed senses of taste, hearing, touch, etc. So motor development, what we're looking at, okay, so we are in the lifelong utilization stage, heading through into lifelong daily activity, lifelong recreational, and also lifelong competitive utilization, depending on the individual. So the balance should be shifting now from training to competition. Don't stress too much about it. Okay, if they don't want to compete, don't stress, it's fine. Not everybody wants to compete. Competition is not the be all and end all of life. Okay, many people will specialize in a specific sport by this point if they haven't already. Okay, generally speaking, we see that specialization earlier and earlier. The reason for it is that it takes so much time for a person to reach the highest levels. And normally our programs are identifying people younger and by the time they're hitting 16, 17 years old, they're either at that level or somewhere close to it, or they're basically never going to reach that point at all. They pretty much don't have a prayer. Simply because all the developmental stuff that has to happen happens earlier. Okay, strength and conditioning development are important during this phase because same reasons as earlier. It reduces injury and it increases the amount that they're able to play. They can play more, they get injured less, therefore they get better. And if you're only doing 5 matches a year and another kid is doing 20 matches a year, over the span of 10 years, that's a lot of matches. That's a lot of ground to make up. That's a lot of experience and knowledge. And if, you know, that's the problem that you have when you're getting into 18, 19, 21, and you're only just starting to do 10 or 20 matches a year. At this point, those are really, really hard matches. And if you're only just coming into that world, the chances of you getting injured is a lot higher, because these other guys and girls, they've been at this for a lot longer. They've been lifting weights. They've been in gyms since they were very young. They have been traveling and training and competing at high levels for an extended period of time. You're coming in without that benefit, and which makes it really, really hard for kids coming in who may have only come in 3 or 4 years behind everybody else. But that 3 or 4 years, you've still got to catch that up somehow. And if you can't sustain the pace that these guys can, because they're conditioned to it. They've been doing it for 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years. You're going to struggle, and you're going to push your body hard, and you're going to get injured and tired and everything else, which means you spend less time training. You're not used to working the way that they do. You're not used to doing what they do. You haven't been doing it, and consequently, you push yourself harder to try to catch up, which is not what you should be doing. Things get sloppy, you get injured, and around and around and around and around you go. Okay? That's the biggest problem that we see at the moment. The injury risk does increase for exactly what we've just been talking about. If we haven't done the early groundwork development way back, then by the time we get up to here, 18, 10 years plus of development that has gone into this person. If you only came in at 12, you're 4 years behind. That 4 years that's a big gap, and that's the reality. So I mean, that's one of the reasons why we do see the increased rate. That's why strength and conditioning is so important. Okay, and that's why we see the level of specialization, and that's why we see that big dropout in that puberty level, is because it becomes blatantly obvious that there is a great big gaping hole between you as a new person coming in and these guys who've been here for close to a decade already. Okay, so our cognitive development, okay, we're still in this formal operational stage, so not a lot has changed. There are post-formal operational, higher reasoning, rapid learning. They should have full emotional control. They should have well-established morals and ethical ideas, and some idea of their purpose in life, or a life plan, or a vague indication of where they want to go. Okay, that's not for everybody. Okay, some of us, hey, that's never going to be the way things are done. Myself, for example, I'll be entirely honest, I pretty much didn't have much of an idea of what I was going to do until I think this was about when I joined the army. So some kids know what they want to do, some kids don't. If you are fortunate enough that yours does develop that very young, fantastic. But make sure that you equip them for when things do go sideways, because these days, very rarely do you simply pick one career and stay in it for 40 years. That's pretty unusual, okay? And yeah, so that's pretty much that for maturity, so we'll move on to the next bit. just after a break. All right, so take 5, take 10. Just make sure you bring it back, and then we'll get into the next bit. Alrighty, let's go. Okay, section 8, old age. Yeah, like I say, probably about week 9, I think, maybe week 10. Alright, so senescence, that's what we're talking about, old age, elderly, senior, choose whichever term you like. I got grey hair, I'm allowed to say it. Old folks. So physical development, we'll look at perceptual development, motor development, and cognitive development. It's not really development at this stage, it's things are starting to taper off. So physical development, 8 to 12 hours sleep per night. Tend to sleep early and rise late. Depends on the person, depends on what they've been through in their life. Okay. Overeating and alcohol abuse are common issues. Yeah, they are. Yeah, lots of problems as we get on. Can become an issue with mobility and self-reliance as that decreases as we get older. Weight gain is common due to sedentary lifestyles. Life gets in the way. House, kids, 12-hour days, old injuries. Physical activity is critical for a longer and active life. Yes, it is. Okay, the more active you stay, the longer you stay active. So it's it does make sense, but just not a lot of people think about it. And it takes effort. Okay, that's the big thing. Okay, so physical development. So osteoporosis can occur, can become an issue in older women. That said, it can become an issue in men as well. So decreasing testosterone in males becomes an issue. Yeah, fair enough. Some males find it, some males don't. Depends on the person. Okay, diabetes risk due to inactivity. Okay, doesn't matter what age you are. That's a risk. Okay, stay active. Okay, stay active, stay relatively healthy. Kind of, sort of, usually. Unless we get injured, in which case that's different. Brain neural breakdown can begin as we age. That's why it's important to keep studying and doing things to keep yourself active. Okay, not just physically active, but mentally active as well. Strokes and other issues due to poor health practices can impact brain development. Yeah, so that's just the way it goes, unfortunately. Longer you do something, higher the chance something's going to go wrong. Aging, the telomere concept. So aging is something that's been researched and debated inside and out. Don't believe everything you see on the internet, but there's a couple different schools of thought. So the telomere concept, aging is dictated by shortening of parts of the DNA known as telomeres. So the telomeres can only be shortened to a certain point. Once there is no more shortening to be done, then pretty much that's it. Okay. The free radical idea. So this is the idea that contamination and pollution impact health. So free radicals cause damage to DNA, which which results in illness and disease, and therefore shortens our lifespan. The final thing is probably an amalgamation of both of these and more. Okay, they both make sense to a point that DNA starts to break down, or things start to break down, and over time, and that contamination and pollution would have impacts on health. Stands to reason. So what the final answer is as to what actually causes aging, that's for people and far smarter than me and well outside the scope of a sports scientist. Okay, perceptual development, where's that go? So we start to see a loss of coordination due to the neural degradation. So the neural pathways begin to break down. We start to see visual issues because things start to break down. So these nerve pathways are breaking down. And then we start to see a loss of depth perception, and then Alzheimer's as well. We start to see that. We see social isolation and disconnection. It happens because you end up with more dead friends than live ones. Okay, it sucks. Okay, you've buried more people than you've been to more funerals than you have to births. It ain't good for your mental health, I'm telling you now. Okay. Motor development, where we go from there. So we see the application and lifelong utilization phase. That's where we are. Injury risk due to falls is higher, particularly in females, because we start to see if they get early onset osteoporosis, then that can actually impact their life quite significantly very early on. Okay, injuries become early injuries become a major problem. So an injury can accelerate your risk of arthritis, and which then impacts your ability to have a healthy and active life, because there's things you won't be able to do, or won't be able to do without pain, or you'll need various supplements to get by on, or medication. Strength is essential to quality of life. Yep. So basically, if we're stronger, we got a better chance of weathering the storms, so to speak. Sport involvement can support physical and mental health. It can also do the opposite. Okay, you get a toxic culture, and it's going to have bad effects on your health. So make sure you're doing positive stuff and keeping your environment happy and healthy. Muscle loss, 20 to 40% at 60 years, 50% at 70 and over. But again, there is this myth around that you can't build muscle after a certain point. That is rubbish. Okay, you can. Your body will continue to build muscle. It doesn't suddenly stop, and that's it. You will just waste away to nothing. Again, remember, principle of reversibility, if you haven't run across that already. Okay, what you don't use, you lose. So the more we're using it, the longer we will keep it. Okay, the less likely our body is to let it degrade. All right, cognitive development. So our cognitive development cognitive functions begin to decline as the neural pathways begin to decline. Again, more active you keep them, the longer it delays that process of breakdown. Mental acuity decreases if stimulus is lacking or insufficient. So sticking a person in a home or something like that is probably not the best thing for them. Okay, they need to be kept engaged and active and moving. All right, so the effect of technology on this is still unknown. Okay, some technology and some tools can be quite useful, like what we're doing now. Okay, where we're recording stuff and engaging with people and providing a stimulus. But how much is enough? How much is too much? And that's something that's still being worked out and will continue to be for quite some time. Often the older you get, the harder it is to adapt to new changes in technology. This is true, but I think if you've grown up with a growth mindset and you're always looking to challenge yourself, I think you'll find it easier. And then not engaging with the technology becomes something more of a choice, an informed choice that you make as to, this is not something that I really need. Okay, go back when I was younger, you had to remember phone numbers. Now I've only got a handful of phone numbers that I will actually remember. That's not a good thing. I used to be able to remember hundreds of people's phone numbers. So yeah, how useful is the technology? How much does it help us retain and remember things? That's a different matter entirely and a different debate. So focus across the lifespan. So basically, at 25 to 34 years, their main focus is on their work and what we call empire building. And friends, family, and then our independence is sort of getting towards the bottom of the list. It's not the least thing. We still like a high degree of independence, but it doesn't have to be, it's not as important as it was. Okay. In those sort of 35 through to 54-ish years, lots of people prioritize their family over their work, which is fair enough. And then friends and cognitive fitness, mental facilities. I'm not sure I agree with that. Read into that whatever you want. Remember, these are just broad generalizations. So 55 to 65 years, again, family's still high up the list, and now health is starting to take over as we see more of these health concerns come into effect. Okay, friends are still there, and our cognitive fitness starts to it's still present, but it's not, it hasn't started moving its way up the list yet. 70 through to about 84 years, families up the top of the list, health and cognitive fitness is starting to become more important as we start to realize that, hey, some of this stuff I used to be able to remember that. I used to know that. And then friends, the friends start to drift down the bottom, mainly because they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. You now end up where you're starting to lose friends. you've lost a lot of them, or you may have lost a lot of them by that point. 85 plus, health is top of the list. Family is still very important. Thinking of reflecting on your life, apparently. And again, this depends on the person. And finally, cognitive fitness. Again, you want the friend thing, because it starts to get really unusual to have extended groups of friends at that age, because a lot of people have passed on by then. So yeah, that's just something to be aware of. And that is basically it for that. And that's all you will run across in this course, in this unit. It is a lot to take in. Don't stress. It does make sense, okay? You've got really great lecturers. I think you may have Annette, or you may have Shane. Yeah. So enjoy your time. Ask lots of questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions, especially about this stuff. And if you can wrap your head around this, it makes you as a coach a lot better. So, all right, thanks very much, guys, and good